Good morning, y'all. Hope you're doing well today. So in today's message, I want to start the conversation about the Trickster Archetype. So I've seen a couple of really great videos about it, and I've still got more research I want to do, but I'm going to leave the links to the two videos in the description for you all to go and do further research for yourself. So they were just really to the point and well presented, and something that maybe I can just add to, but sometimes it's hard for me to summarize something I read or something I watch, when really I just want to share it with you directly and encourage you to buy the book or to go watch the videos, because sometimes the people just do such a wonderful job of presenting the topic the way it is, and I just don't want to mess with that. You know what I mean? So I'm going to put that in there, but I certainly have some thoughts on the Trickster Archetype that I want to share with you all based on the research I've done so far. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation today. I'm going to be sharing an excerpt from this book that I still haven't read. But it's in line with the overall message, and so hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. So essentially, this is my initial impression based on what little research I've done of the Trickster Archetype. So I'm learning that it seems that archetypes, I think a lot of these were identified by Carl Jung. It seems like they have like a light side and a dark side, right? Or a good and a bad, or a positive and a negative side to them. And so what I found with the Trickster Archetype is that it's the same. And so the good side is called the Magician, and we're going to talk about it. And the bad or the negative side, I would call, it's the way it's described sounds like a narcissistic individual, or someone even possibly a sociopath or psychopath, someone who's just deeply enmeshed in lies and just lives via deceit, just deceiving people and exploiting, and those same type of qualities that you hear associated with things like narcissism is like the dark side of it, okay? And what ties this all together when you think about especially like covert narcissism, when you tie that in with like a magician, it's like, what do they have in common? Because when you think about like the Wizard of Oz, for example, there was Glinda, the good witch, right, who could work magic, and then there was the Wicked Witch of the West, right, or is it East? It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I think she even had a sister, the Wicked Witch did, in the Wizard of Oz. But my point here is, throughout all these different fairy tales and folklore and myths and all, magic can be worked for either good or for bad, and that's an essential element of the Trickster Archetype. And the reason is what these two sides of the same coin, the Trickster Archetype, be it manifested in a positive way through a magician who works for good, or whether it's manifested in a negative way through someone who is a liar and using people and abusing people. What I have found is that they're experts in the same thing, and what they're experts in is the unconscious part of the human psyche, which most of humanity, well, this is just my opinion, I feel like it's most of humanity, is totally unaware of. So it's kind of like they have this upper hand in that manner, because they understand something that the majority of people don't, right? Or we could at least safely say that a lot of people don't understand, which is why it's called the unconscious. Everything that we don't understand resides there, see? So even that in itself can be symbolic, that just anything a person doesn't understand or that they're not aware of resides in the unconscious. So if another person out here in your life, which some of us have experienced this firsthand, if they're aware of things that you're unaware of, right, they're keeping you in the dark on purpose, well, then they do have the upper hand in some, way, shape, form or fashion. And I feel like intuition tells us, or it does me, that a person who loves you doesn't want to keep you in the dark on anything, right? But here's the thing. Magicians are sort of like, especially in the light that we're discussing today, they're sort of like shamans, okay? In that instead of just coming straight out and just, you know, telling you something like a textbook, just, you know, like just data, just point blank, they understand that for it to really resonate with you, instead of just, you know, plopping it in your lap, you know, like this blob, and it's just data or wisdom, they know that that's not going to be useful for you, see. So a shaman is going to be very creative in the way that they tap into the deeper parts of your psyche, where they're kind of dancing at that border between your conscious and unconscious, so that it brings that wisdom down into your psyche to a place where, you know, they work it so that it creates understanding within you. You see what I'm saying? And so then it's useful. Then it's like it'll stick, okay? It'll actually have an impact in your life. So that's what I have found so far. It's just super intriguing. And I thought about waiting on sharing about the Trickster Archetype with you all, but I just don't want to wait. And in fact, I think there's probably so much that I could do multiple videos on it. So I wanted to go ahead and open the video today, or open the topic today in today's video with you all. And then we can just add more videos as I learn more. And I would love to hear your comments down below too, as you research or whatever you're already aware of and things like that. But yeah, so shamans, you know, a lot of times, excuse me, y'all, they're very controversial. And it's, you know, one thing that's really interesting is, and maybe there's a textbook term for this, I don't know, but it's apparently a real thing, and I know this from firsthand experience. There's some type of mechanism that I think a lot of us are unaware of, that can be intentionally invoked within you from another individual, for good or bad, okay? Like from a trickster archetype, from a con man, or from a shaman, if they're looking to help you, okay? So it can be tapped either way. And that mechanism is to invoke a shock response in you. Because when you are shocked in some way, it's kind of like it provides whoever shocked you with immediate access into these deeper parts, like maybe your subconscious. It's like it bypasses your conscious awareness, almost like a hypnotism type technique, you know what I mean? And so, which is why it's so important, see, I think for especially like soldiers to understand these things, because certainly being in a war is very shocking and jarring, right? And so, you know, these, you know, military leaders certainly can't send their soldiers out into the midst of a battle and, you know, think they're going to be just fine without preparing them psychologically. They have to be prepared psychologically, see, not just physically. And so, you know, we can, once we are aware of these things, these mechanisms of the human psyche, then, you know, we're going to be better prepared just for life in general. And that's where, you know, that's part of the reason why I really like yoga, because that's where things like that come into play, and like breathing techniques, because you're consciously taking control of of these mechanisms, you know, via different techniques, you know, either deep breathing, intentional breathing, or, you know, challenging poses that you're holding your body in, like with yoga or meditation or whatever. I don't know what all kind of techniques there are out there, but that's a really important thing to understand. And I feel like, you know, for me, as long as I understand it's there and it's a mechanism that can be hacked by somebody else if I'm not on guard, see, I'm trying to share what I've learned with you all so that I can help you hopefully to be more on guard against people with bad intentions in this world. And so, but that's what shamans do see. Shamans actually, if a person comes to a shaman and they're very troubled because of trauma that they've been through in their life, it's likely that they have been trapped in just a state of suffering from the initial trauma or possibly ongoing trauma because of, when you hear about terms like trauma bonds, it's like that shock effect, like almost places a person into this trance, like they're under this spell, this curse from that point until it's broken, you see. And I know this firsthand. I, as a spiritual person, I'll just share with you all, I think sometimes that when you're, truly begging God for help and you're doing the work that you can, I think that sometimes He places particular people on our path to break this spell. Because sometimes it takes that. And if you're fortunate enough to come across someone like this, essentially a shaman, someone who understands this stuff, right? I think when we hear that term, we think of we visualize some type of, tribal person in this just wild, garment and, face paint and just dancing and just, something that's totally not the standard type of person you'd see in modern society, right? But honestly, there are real shamans today that look like me and you, and they can be a huge blessing in your life. And so, this is why sometimes therapists don't help, because they're just providing you with information which just sits here, and you go home and you work on it and you're trying to process it and bring it down into a deeper level of understanding, but there's a very, very crucial part missing. You're still under the spell. You're still under a trance. And even though that sounds like woo-woo or whatever you want to call it, it's really not when you understand the mechanics of the human psyche. Okay? It's, I would even propose, scientific. And that's where just this sleight of hands with labels and terms, things like a trance-like state or being under a curse or a spell gets just immediately disregarded and just associated with fairy tales, and so people dismiss it even as a possibility of being a real thing when it really is a real thing. And I know this firsthand. You're essentially stuck in a trauma response. But it's so impactful that when you hear people talking about, oh, well, you're in a trauma bond or it's a trauma response, it doesn't resonate with you. Because from, a firsthand experience, from the experience when a person's in this, it feels like and resonates with you like you are under a spell. And that's why it's just such a deep, like, it almost feels like your spirit is arrested, okay? Just in this state of imprisonment so intense that, these textbook terms just don't do it justice. You understand? It's like, that's why a lot of people, this is what opens the door for them to the spiritual aspect of life if they've never gone there before, or it either opens the door wider for those of us who were spiritual before. It's like we're especially so now because we've experienced these things firsthand, and some of it is just undeniable with regards to the spiritual realm. Okay, you hear very logical people who have YouTube channels. It's almost all of them that I've seen, it's like they'll have to put a video out there to talk about the spiritual element because it's undeniable when you've gone through this stuff. And so, remember, I can't remember what movie this was in, but it might have been The Devil's Advocate, I don't know, but the quote is, and it rings so true to me, the greatest trick, or maybe it was The Usual Suspects, maybe that was it, with Kaiser Soze. I think that was the character's name. Just a great movie, highly recommend it, with Kevin Spacey. But the quote is, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was getting the world to believe he didn't exist. See? And so that, you know, knowledge is power. It really is. But you have to be able to understand it. It can't just sit there like, you know, data points or whatever, right? So I want to share an excerpt from this book with you all. Okay, so apparently there was, and I was unaware of this author, but there was an author, he died in the 80s. I think he was in his 50s when he passed away. His name was Philip K. Dick, and he was a science fiction writer. And from what I can tell, his stories were primarily about, I think it was Britannica that had an article on him that was really interesting, the way they worded it. Apparently his stories were about psychological struggles, like real psychological struggles that we have, humanity has, especially with regards to being enmeshed in or living life via an illusory existence. In other words, being under a spell, or, you know, disillusioned, or however you want to call it, right? And I think he knew this stuff firsthand, because it mentioned him, you know, struggling with drugs and mental illness and all this. So, you know, I don't think that people who have done drugs or who have experienced mental illnesses should be dismissed in any way, because I think that there are different avenues that bring people to a different state of awareness, that can enlighten us to these otherwise darkened spaces within our unconscious awareness. It's like there's different avenues to get to those places to bring them to the light, and some of the avenues are dangerous, and, you know, I certainly don't condone anything like that, like drugs or anything, but you know, there are people who claim that they can reach you know, or access these parts of the unconscious without the use of drugs, through different techniques and stuff. Really interesting to read about different cultures and their practices with doing so. And so I'm not the type of person that dismisses information that comes from someone like a science fiction writer just because they had a bout with drugs or had mental illness. Because to me, if those parts of the human psyche didn't exist, we would never be able to access them. So they're there, and they're there for a reason. And so I feel like there's something, you know, that we have to learn from, you know, if we are able to get access to those areas. All right, so let me just share with you a little bit here in this book. I don't know if there's different publications or what. This is the paperback, and this is in chapter 6, which is called The Enlightened Madness of Philip K. Dick. And then the subtitle is The Black Iron Prison in Wetego. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Wetego or Wetego, I don't know, in my mind it's you pronounce it Wetego, so that's what I'm going to say. But I'm going to skip through a little bit. And you know, the first part I highlighted was reminiscent of what I've talked to you all about recently, about some narcissistic people, specifically the covert type, that hide their true intentions, right, under just a great facade, and how they seem robotic, right? It said android thinking, i.e. robotic, machine-like, standardized group thinking with no creativity programmed in, is one of the qualities of a mind taken over by Wetego / the Black Iron Prison. So, you know, something else that I came across yesterday in a quote, I believe, from Carl Jung, that I want to explore again, mentions something like this, that there's this like a switch that happens within the human psyche when I think the quote from Jung mentioned that the individual is dissolved when they are submerged in a larger group. And it's like what results is this group think or hive mind, okay? And that this can actually produce, it's kind of like the quote from Jung mentioned that what results is, it's like everybody's collective shadow side, which is the negative aspect of humanity, emerges from this hive mind or this group think. And it can actually manifest out in our physical reality, the shadow, the collective shadow. This was part of that quote from Jung. I believe it was actually like a picture quote that was in one of the videos that I'm going to share a link in the description with you all. I think it was in one of those. You'll know when you see it. But this collective shadow within the circumstances of, you know, a group, you know, where the hive mind takes over, this collective shadow can manifest out in our physical reality by, this is just my part that, you know, because it said that part, it could manifest like in our physical reality. And I'm thinking like how? And I guess it could be like, you know, if people are just collectively angry and they're angry to a degree that it's unreasonable, and they're stuck in black and white thinking, and they're not, you know, considering the gray area, which is very important. And then, you know, they may elect someone that has this this dominating type personality to be in control and power, and this could turn into you know, someone who's you know, really bad for a country or for society, you know, like a leader that's I can't even think of the word right now. I'm just thinking of like a someone who dominates, right? You see where I'm going with this. But anyway, yes, it's really interesting. And he calls it down here at the bottom of page 119 a collective psychosis. It's kind of like the more, and it makes sense, the more we subject ourselves to the confinement of groupthink for this, I think, this is me, there's, because of this subconscious, you know, extreme need for belonging, see, then it's kind of like the other aspects of the gray area or logic dissolve, and everybody just gets really focused on, you know, what binds them together, which unfortunately sometimes can be the shadow aspect of humanity, you know, which feels to me like the psychology behind gangs and things like that, right? Really interesting stuff. But it says here, he quotes one of Philip K. Dick's books called The Divine Invasion. It says, in that book, one of the characters says, "Sometimes I think this planet is under a spell. We are asleep or in a trance." Throughout this work, he calls him PKD. PKD writes about our species becoming beguiled, enchanted, and enslaved. He felt that it was as if we were living within a mythic or fairy tale-like reality, and that our species is under a bewitchment, a seeming curse of massive proportions. And then he starts talking about, you know, the things that he says violate our true identity, right? Yeah, it's almost like the results of being manipulated, having our minds manipulated collectively, almost like a cult type thing. This is contemplating the basic condition of life. PKD writes that each one of us will be required to violate your own identity. This is the curse at work, the curse that feeds on all life, which is the same concept that an individual can experience when they are being psychologically abused and controlled by a manipulator, by a controller. That's the same thing that happens, which is why you come out of it feeling like you've lost yourself, or feeling like your identity was stolen when you literally watch this other person copycat you, you know, and it's like all the things they put down about you, and now it's manifesting in them as they're devaluing you. It's bizarre to experience, right? So it's just I wanted to share that part. And then he goes into a section within this chapter called Wetiko according to PKD. And I'm going to see which part I want to share with you all. Okay, let me start with this. This is really interesting. All right. He's starting to talk about language. Okay, so he says, as the 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein pointed out, we can easily bewitch our natural intelligence by the unconscious misusage of the magical reality shaping power of language. Yes, I've essentially said this before in my own words, and it's so true. How words are powerful, and how I think that we don't even, like he's talking about subconsciously, we don't even really know what we're doing. Like, you know, Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." It's like we need to work at becoming as aware and conscious as possible of our part in shaping not only our personal life, but those that are within our reach, right? Like our friends and family, and our reality, our immediate reality. Yeah, listen to this. He says, language is composed of words which are made by spelling. Through our use of words, we can cast either imprisoning or liberating spells. Language isn't merely descriptive, but is invocative, evocative, and creative. As if casting a spell, the power of words calls forth and conjures up a particular universe into existence. As a writer, PKD was intimately familiar with the power of language to create reality, which he did time and again through his various stories. Yes. And then, gosh, there's just so much I want to share with you all. And so, I want to keep this kind of short today, but let me just share this one last part before I close out the video today, because I want to do a part 2 for sure. It says, to quote PKD, we may not be what we seem even to ourselves. What we seem to be is not who we are. The appearances of things are misleading. We seem to ourselves one way, but are in actuality another. Wetiko / the Black Iron Prison, BIP, is in competition with us for a share of our own mind. It literally does everything it can to think in our place and occupy our rightful place in the universe. Speaking of this very situation, PKD writes, a usurper is on the throne. Okay, and then just to expand here, I mean, this definitely sounds like an actual experience out here in reality if you're, in the grips of a controlling person, right, or group. But I think it also can be psychological as well, right? It says, PKD also writes, being without psyche of its own, it slays the authentic psyches of those creatures locked into it and replaces them with a spurious microform of its own dead psyche. Isn't that kind of creepy? How familiar that sounds if you've been a victim of narcissistic abuse or psychological abuse. It's very familiar, isn't it? It says, sometimes using the phrase, the Black Iron Prison police state, which is mirrored externally in the ever-increasing police state of the world, PKD also describes the state as one where the person so afflicted becomes frozen, as in trauma, in a corpse state, or i.e. becomes spiritually dead. All right. And then I want to expand on this later. He's talking about shock, and what that does to us, which is exactly what I was talking about. He expands into talking about the Matrix and concepts there. And then the Empire, discussing concepts from Star Wars and things like that. He mentions William Blake. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it if you have interest in this topic, okay? But essentially, what it comes down to is this. The trickster archetype can be something that we struggle with. Some of us have had firsthand experiences with out in the real world via people who are just liars. They're essentially wolves in sheep's clothing. Okay? So it definitely, experiencing this certainly harkens to spiritual concepts, right? For sure. But also it can be a psychological process where there's a part of our psyche that, because we are unaware of it, it can actually cause self-sabotage. Okay? And the people who understand, I don't know that you can, humanly truly understand all of the unconscious part of the human psyche. I feel like, 100% would be only what God knows, our creator who made us this way. This is just my opinion. But the people who, know more than the average person are the people who can use what they know for good or for bad. And that's the trickster archetype. And it can manifest out in our life via a con man or woman, or via someone who maybe has gone through that and has been made aware, and who wants to use what they've learned for good in the world to help free people from the curse that they were put under by a controller. So how this manifests within one's own psyche, I need to do more research on. But I just hope that this has been entertaining and interesting to you. I especially hope it got the wheels turning for you, and I hope it was just a good introduction and starting point to pique your interest for the trickster archetype. So thanks so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.